It's Friday, the 31st of January 2025. Let's take a look at the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. First, the Punch newspaper. Stakeholders demand Wike Bauchi government truce as governors meet today. Fubara's camp wants Damagun kicked out as chairman. Opposition government converge on Asaba. You can turn to page 2 of the Punch newspaper to get the complete story. Above that, FBN Holdings earnings rise by 113% to 3.3 trillion naira. Profit grows by 142% to 900 billion naira as holdings post stellar financial performance. You can turn to page 21 of the Punch newspaper to get the complete story. Beside the nameplate, domestic shortfall. NNPC marketers import 633 million litres of fuel. You can turn to page 19 of the Punch newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath that, 67 dead as plane, helicopter collide mid-air in US. You can turn to page 3 of the Punch newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath the pictures, South Africa-Rwanda clash over DR Congo conflict. You can turn to page 28 of the Punch newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath that, APC PDP differ over Amaechi's power drum politicians comment. You can turn to page 2 of the Punch newspaper to get the complete story. Beside that, herdsmen kill 5 laborers on Ondo farm. You can turn to page 4 of the Punch newspaper to get the complete story. Besides that, Lagos Assembly insists Obasa's removal legal as DSS grills lawmakers. You can turn to page 28 of the Punch newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath that, banks complied with court ruling on ex parte Mareva order GHL. You can turn to page 28 of the Punch newspaper to get the complete story. The next is the Daily Trust. Fresh controversy trails IGP's tenure extension. Sowore insists Egba tokens stay illegal. Nothing wrong with status AGF Fagbemi. Sacking top cop will save Nigeria embarrassment. Police Council duly confirmed him, says FHQ. You can turn to page 4 of the Daily Trust newspaper to get the complete story. Above that, Akande, how I convinced Tinubu to run for president. You can turn to page 24 of the Daily Trust newspaper to get the complete story. Beside that, Appeal Court affirms IPOB as terrorist group. You can turn to page 6 of the Daily Trust newspaper to get the complete story. Beside that, democracy has come to stay in Nigeria. Abdusalami. You can turn to page 10 of the Daily Trust newspaper to get the complete story. Beside the picture, Hajj 2025, low turnout as fair payment deadline ends today. You can turn to page 14 of the Daily Trust newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath that, Northern elders fought ex-NHIA bosses arrest as court remands Yusuf in AFCC custody. You can turn to page 24 of the Daily Trust newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath that, low crude supply miles naira for crude scheme. Dangote gets 61,290 BPD for March against 380,000 BPD mandate. You can turn to page 3 of the Daily Trust newspaper to get the complete story. Residents attack firefighters, preventing them from scooping fuel. You can turn to page 17 of the Daily Trust newspaper to get the complete story. Now we move to the Nigerian Tribune. The bolder headlines: Presidency, El-Rufai trade words over governance, opposition. Be ready to defend your vote, Amaechi tells Nigerians. Says politicians kill, maim to remain in power. We owe survival of our democracy to people's resilience, Abdusalami. You can turn to page 3 and page 13 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Above the nameplate, FBN Holdings PLC delivers stellar financial performance. Profit increased to 0.9 trillion naira, up 142%. You can turn to page 7 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Beside the picture, banks comply with court ruling lifting expert Mareva order against JHL. You can turn to page 6 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Appeal Court affirms order prescribing IPOB as terrorist group. You can turn to page 14 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Underneath that, immigration intercept 21 minors illegally taken out of Nigeria. You can turn to page 14 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Owa Igbajo Court nullifies Adeleke's executive order on Famodun's removal. You can turn to page 25 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Underneath the picture, FIRS exceeded 2024 revenue targets, collected 21.6 trillion naira, says Adedeji. Agency gets 25.2 trillion naira target for 2025. FIRS most important agency now, Finance Minister. You can turn to page 6 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Under that, Labour proposes 5% increase, gears up for February 4 protest over telecom tariff hike. You can turn to page 23 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Beside that, DSS grills Lagos lawmakers over Obasa's removal. Lawmakers released after hours of interrogation. You can turn to page 3 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Now the Vanguard newspaper. The border headlines: NLC mobilizes state councils, allies, affiliates for February 4 protest. You can turn to page 5 of the Vanguard newspaper to get the complete story. Above the nameplate, FBN Holdings PLC delivers stellar financial performance. Profit increased to 0.9 trillion naira, up 142%. You can turn to page 26 of the Vanguard newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath the border headlines, alleged cybercrime, Saore gets 10 million naira bail. You can turn to page 7 of the Vanguard newspaper to get the complete story. Beside the picture, LG Autonomy, chairman not yet director to open accounts, investigation. You can turn to page 9 of the Vanguard newspaper to get the complete story. Diaspora remittances up 79% to $4 billion in 9 months 2024, Cadastro. You can turn to page 19 of the Vanguard newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath the picture, insecurity, how Asaba became home to Southeast indigenes. You can turn to page 14 of the Nigerian Tribune to get the complete story. Underneath that, banks comply with court ruling lifting ex parte Mareva order against GHL. You can turn to page 8 of the Vanguard newspaper to get the complete story. Beside that, no likely survivors in US plane crash as 30 bodies are pulled from river. You can turn to page 9 of the Vanguard newspaper to get the complete story. Beside that, I will position NRC for socio-economic growth, OPEIFA. You can turn to page 10 of the Vanguard newspaper to get the complete story. Beside that, sports, 2026 World Cup, what Super Eagles need to qualify, Bako. You can turn to page 27 of the Vanguard newspaper to get the complete story. Now to Business Day. The border headline says, what to know as GDP price index rebased. You can turn to page 31 of the Business Day newspaper to get the complete story. Above the nameplate, FBN Holdings PLC delivers stellar performance as profit up 142%. Gross earnings rise by 113% to 3.33 trillion naira. You can turn to page 30 of the Business Day newspaper to get the complete story. Beside the picture, BDS begin merger talks ahead of the capitalization deadline. You can turn to page 31 as well to get the story. Underneath that, lessons for Nigeria as Morocco rakes in $11 billion from tourism. You can turn to page 30 of the Business Day newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath that, FIRS reports record 21.6 trillion naira revenue. You can turn to page 2 of the Business Day newspaper to get the complete story. Finally, the Guardian newspaper. The broader headlines: optimism as West African cities get $50 billion lifeline, fresh bid for electricity. You can turn to page 4 and 5 to get the complete story. Above the nameplate, FBN Holdings PLC's gross earnings hit 3.33 trillion naira as profit rises by 142% to 0.9 trillion naira. You can get the complete story at page 25 of the Guardian newspaper. Underneath the picture, 7 contractors received 24 billion naira, failed to execute project, report reveals. You can turn to page 7 of the Guardian newspaper to get the complete story. Beside that, FG unveils $23.2 billion energy compact, targets $15.5 billion private investment. You can turn to page 7 of the Guardian newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath that, article 4 Tinubu's harassment as Amechi warns of power claims. You can turn to page 6 of the Guardian newspaper to get the complete story. Tax reform bills, Lamido Galadima reopen. Beside that, tax reform bills, Lamido Galadima reopen anti-North rhetoric with inheritance tax. You can turn to page 6 of the Guardian newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath that, Cardoso says Naira reverting to true value as confidence returns. You can turn to page 18 of the Guardian newspaper to get the complete story. Underneath that, Appeal Court affirms IPOB's prescription on ESN's 4th anniversary. You can turn to page 3 of the Guardian newspaper to get the complete story. These are the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. If any of these headlines caught your attention, do well to get a copy of the paper to get the complete story.
Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates.
Housing TV Africa, your first in housing development broadcasting.